Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. A fascinating first day of testing in Bahrain with major storylines both on and off the track. Max Verstappen's Red Bull RB22 turned the most heads today, arguably the most impressive driver-car combination out there on track today. Toto Wolff goes as far to say that is the benchmark. He says Mercedes can't come close to the level of energy deployment, the level of top speed that the Red Bull is currently able to generate. But is this all a massive political game? People are wondering about Mercedes sandbagging on the first day of the test, especially after what we saw back in Barcelona, and on the brink of a potential change to the engine rules. Maybe there is more to this from Mercedes' perspective than initially meets the eye. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. These are the drivers getting their pictures done. The season is back. We had Formula 1 cars on track. We had proper broadcasts, at least for the last 1 hour of today, and we'll get to that in the coming minutes. We're going to start with a couple of things from Lewis Hamilton. I think he went for a couple of spins today as well in the Ferrari. Lots of drivers struggling out there. These cars, it was windy today as well. These cars definitely are harder to drive than their predecessors in terms of, they're more raw. They snap a little bit more. They're maybe easier to get a handle of as a driver. You can probably collect them up more easily than previous cars that we have had, but it does feel like from the aerodynamic perspective, they are more like the racing cars we want than their predecessors. But there are other issues, and as Hamilton says, the complexity of the electrical energy deployment and all this stuff is on such a level that none of the fans will understand it. It's ridiculously complex. I had 7 meetings one day to take us all through it. It's like we need a degree to fully understand it all. Now this comes from various elements. Of course, we've got boost, which is what we used to call like energy deployment or ERS or whatever you want to say. Effectively, that is standard use of electricity through the lap. You've then got the overtake mode, which lets you use more of it if you're close enough to the car in front in certain zones. I think there's like 1 detection point, then you can use it from there. The complexity comes in with the fact that it's not like it's on or off. There are various zones where you can use it and use more of it, and up to certain speeds, there's like a curve that decreases the amount of deployment you can actually use. Some teams will have more than others. It's like when AWS would throw up those graphics in the last couple of years and it would say Verstappen 75% battery, Leclerc 25% or whatever. That's all made up. They don't know what the numbers are. The teams don't share it. So, I mean, as far as I'm aware anyway, that's purely like guesstimated based on what they see on the track and just to give themselves a little integration basically. I don't know if it's going to be like that this year, but probably it will be, right? And that is, I think, going to cause an issue. You will see overtakes happen where someone just flies down the inside way faster than the other guy. It's like, okay, well, clearly they deployed more energy. And Crofty will be like, well, I guess that means that later in the lap, the other guy will have more energy to come back at him. But you don't know that. It's like when DRS is open, you know that the guy who's just been overtaken is going to have some overspeed and might have a chance to get the overtake back. But all of this electrical stuff, it's all invisible. And I think that's the problem that we're going to see this year in terms of understanding what is really going on. And Hamilton kind of says that. It's like the drivers will understand it once they get used to it. They will be talking about it. The way you drive the cars is obviously going to be different as well. But to actually watch the racing, I think it's going to be very interesting, maybe for good or for bad. Now, speaking of good or bad, Riccardo Adami was fired, right? Let go. He's been dropped down to a different division at Ferrari. Adami and Hamilton weren't working as a combo, but Hamilton gives some interesting perspective on this, right? And I thought it must have been really quite bad for it to get to this point. Now, of course, Hamilton says working with him was great. It was genuinely great. Yeah, sure, buddy. Last year was very tough for us all. His patience and work ethic were outstanding. So he gives his patience and work ethic some strong suits, maybe other elements not so much. But that bond with the engineer is critical. Obviously, it wasn't great, and he's going to have to adapt, as he says. And this is what's interesting because he goes on to give in quite some detail that it was a very difficult decision to make. It's a difficult period. It's not long term because he's got a temporary engineer, I think Carlos Santi, for the next, well, apparently for the start of the season until they bring in that guy from McLaren, that French guy that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, who's actually meant to be his race engineer. But the guy that he's currently working with is not the guy that he will be using as his race engineer. So it's like, as he says, the solution is only going to be a few races with this current man. Early on into the season, I'll be switching up again. I've got to learn to work with somebody new. That's detrimental to me as well. The season where you want to arrive with people who have done multiple seasons, been through thick and thin together. It's the situation I'm faced with, and I'll do the best that I can. But I mean, presumably he caused this situation, right? Like, that's how it seems anyway, that he wanted rid of Adami. So, I mean, Hamilton admits that this is going to cause problems. It's not going to be easy to make this transition. But clearly, at least as far as we understand or would theorise, he preferred this eventuality than staying with Adami for another year. And to be fair, I don't blame him. I think he's probably made the right call, whoever's made the call. And whoever listened, there was some drama as to whether some of the individuals at Ferrari weren't so happy about it. Whatever, we shall see. Hamilton did comment as well, because obviously it was a tricky morning session for him. He says the cars have a lot less downforce. We came from Barcelona. It's much hotter here, much windier. Finding the right balance is much harder. This is relevant when we talk about Mercedes in a second, because, well, they say they were kind of struggling today to find what they needed. Although some would speculate, are they really struggling, or is there more to it than that? We'll get into that. Before we get there, we've got to talk about the cars. This is the Audi that they displayed in Barcelona at the top. This is the Audi that they displayed today in Bahrain. And there's a lot of similarities here between what Mercedes did in Barcelona and Bahrain 2022. This was the version we saw before. This is their new side pod that they have unveiled. And look, I'm not quite going to call it a zero pod, but the intake is very much vertical. What I find fascinating about F1 is stuff like this. And it's also, there was always talk when this regulation set came out, oh, it's going to be too prescriptive, all the cars are going to look the same. Basically, every single team has a quite radically different concept in some areas. There will be convergence, of course, but we've not seen anyone go for something like this. So, fascinated to see whether this actually works or not. As I say, it's not quite a zero pod because Mercedes had the small vertical intake, but they also kept the pod packaged really tightly. If anything, it's closer to the 1989 Ferrari, which looks like this, with these vertical inlets and then these massive outwashing side pods. That's the intention. But they're a bit more complicated than that, because if you look at it from this angle, you do have this little like downwashing ramp along the top. It looks really good from this angle, actually, I can't lie. There will be talk about the livery. It's kind of this matte silver. Does it look a bit too grey? I think from this angle, I actually kind of like the look of this car. Will it be fast? Probably not. That might be engine related, of course. But it's a fascinating idea that they've come up with, right? And the idea that they've kept it hidden from all of us in Barcelona, just as Mercedes did 4 years ago, and now they're unveiling it here, is particularly compelling. Now, will the other teams be taking notes? I'm sure they absolutely will, but this will be quite the radical idea for any other teams to copy. Maybe it is the best idea, but of course, it's a holistic package, these Formula One cars. There is no, like, one best side pod. There is only the best side pod that works the best with whatever you're doing at the front of the car. So yes, we shall see how that goes. This is the Williams, of course, hitting the track today. I think they did the most laps of anyone, as we'll discuss in the coming minutes, which is a good result given that, let's be honest, they needed it. They've got some more complexity at the rear of their car than I think we've seen on multiple other cars so far. At least in terms of these elements at the back of the floor. You can also see what people are now calling the slotted diffuser. So this gap at the back of the car which allows some airflow into effectively make the diffuser more powerful. Most teams now have gone down that route and realised that that was a viable possibility. Williams certainly one of those, as we see. This is the Aston Martin, and there's quite a lot to say on Aston Martin today. Here is the Flovis, stunning looking car. I think the shot of the day, in my opinion, was this one. I mean, there are some great shots today, but this is a look at that Aston Martin side pod. Now, look, Adrian Newey said it's not actually aggressive, but it is certainly extreme. It's difficult. I mean, I think Toby Gritter called it the mother of all undercuts. It's difficult to make an undercut more substantial than this. I mean, what an angle that is. So you can see the inlet of the side pods and where they want the airflow to go, and then how they're trying to manage the airflow alongside the floor. Spectacular stuff. The car looks good in the green. The side pod doesn't stand out quite as much as it might just because of the way that they've packaged the livery, but still, you get the picture. There's that rear suspension which has been causing a lot of talk as well, and there's also a lot of discussion about the heating and the cooling of the engine, because the car is very tightly packaged, it's very aggressively packaged, it's arguably very ambitiously packaged. And that may be causing issues for powered by Honda that we see at the rear. When Aston Martin drove their car on track in Barcelona, this element where the cooling louvres are, that was just one big segment where the airflow would come out of. Very different to what other teams are doing, and we see that again reflected today. Just by comparison, actually, that segment of the car, which they gave a couple of different versions, just, by way of comparison, really, I know that these images aren't exactly the same angle, but this is the Ferrari and this is the Aston Martin. It's tough to imagine two more different looking cars, at least in that specific segment. So I think it's great. It's great for the sport that we are in this position where the teams do have very different designs and have had the freedom to come up with it. But of course, it does mean that there are certain grey areas and some teams will come up with better ideas than others. But Aston Martin, they were running a lot of cooling. Now, it was hot there today, sure. But it is February. I know that it is Bahrain and it's very hot on the track, but it's not as hot as it can be, right? We are going to have hotter races this season, that is for sure. I mean, Bahrain itself, when we go there, is going to be warmer than it is today. But Aston Martin were not having a good time with their power unit today. And so, for all the beauty of that car and the design that Adrian Newey has come up with, it does appear that for now, the team is being held back by the engine. Now, this isn't a huge surprise, but it was a fear of the team and by fans of the team that they would run into some issues. They're the only team, as far as we know so far, that has not run their car at maximum whack. Even in the morning, they only did about 33 laps or so with Lance Stroll at the wheel. But they were still not running the car flat out. They're only putting it up to like 290, 300 kph on the straight. Max was up at like 340 plus. And that's a big concern because in Barcelona, I was like, okay, they're only doing 1 day of testing. Sure, they limit the top speed, but they're the only team that's been limiting the top speed. Every other team has just been running. Of course, everyone's limiting it to an extent, but Aston Martin were not willing to go to the extreme. And then they started today doing the same thing. And it's like, well, a bit concerning, right? Because at some point, you've got to see what the car's really capable of. And that was not the case. So apparently, just before the lunch break, they opened up the engine cover, but it looked like there was some overheating going on. And the Honda engineers' faces were rather concerned. They were searching for faults with their flashlights. The team didn't want to confirm anything, but they did make a statement and say our power unit test plan with Lance went as planned in the morning. However, we detected a data anomaly this afternoon. So look, Aston Martin, the team will always spin it in the most positive way possible, but that doesn't sound great. We are now proceeding with precautionary checks on the PU to understand the exact root cause before we can resume testing, and I'm pretty sure they did not get back out on track for the whole rest of the day. PJ even says here from Auto Racer, yes, they have significant overheating issues. Not a surprise, but certainly not ideal, right? The car's been very aggressively packaged. They've not been able to run it at maximum speeds. They've got a lot of work to do over the next couple of weeks if they want really any chance of being competitive, I think, for certainly the start of the season. Problems in Aston Martin, as PJ says, not especially surprising ones, but there was kind of this hope that maybe Aston Martin could be an outsider wildcard. Maybe they could give a run for the championship. Early doors, it doesn't look like as good as the aero might be. That's going to be possible this season. This is what was happening on track in the morning. Worthy of note, the reason why these are highlighted in purple here is because the cars were reaching top speed basically halfway down the straight. After that, there was a lot of clipping. Now, clipping is the phenomenon where the car runs out of juice from the electrical side, and therefore it starts to actually reduce in speed towards the end of the straight after it loses that extra power. Now, that has been a thing before. That's not unusual. But this year, it is more extreme than ever. Now, Verstappen's line is actually quite flat, which is impressive, and Toto Wolff is talking about that. But if you look at Piastri in the McLaren, if you look at Russell in the Mercedes, if you look at Ocon here in the Haas, certainly like Russell or Piastri. And that's what's interesting about the Mercedes power unit, that Russell's reaching his top speeds very, very early down the straight. And after that, he's just losing speed all the time until he eventually breaks for turn 1. So clipping is a thing, and it's a problem this year, and managing the energy deployment is a massive issue from the teams. You guys can see they're still on 100% throttle, but they're losing speeds because of their electrical deployment. But notably, of course, firstly, Verstappen's way faster than anybody else. I mean, Russell's at 300 or something kph. Max is up at 339, right? Like, Russell was 30 kph down. That's what that's indicating. So Max was just flying out there today, and he wasn't just flying on a single push lap. He was flying every single lap, and that has turned heads at Mercedes. These are some of the long-run data. Again, it's day 1 of testing. I'm not going to take the lap times too seriously. What's more interesting is what the teams are actually talking about. Like, how do they feel about their rivals? Max's some long run data here. You can see a pretty impressive long run towards the end of the day, very consistently in the high 137s, low 138s. That's not a million miles off what the fastest time of the day was, and we'll get to that in a second. He did the occasional push up here, was a 135. This is what it looked like after the morning then. A 135.4 was the fastest lap of anyone. Piastri, Russell, Hamilton, Ocon, Lindblad, Sainz, Bortoletto, Bottas, Stroll, Colapinto. There was a little red flag, I think, for Colapinto at a time, but they managed to gather that up. Lance Stroll only 10th with only 33 laps, and, well, we'll talk about how they concluded the day. Until Friday, says Toto Wolff, I didn't think there would be any changes. That, however, has changed as of the last couple of days. So Red Bull, we thought they were also trying a similar approach with their compression ratio trick. Maybe they haven't made it work or something. They've now decided to change their minds. And, well, Toto says a couple of interesting things. One thing he says, which I'll just share first, actually, was this comment. In Barcelona, it was just a shakedown. For us, the Red Bull is the fastest car and their engine is the most complete. We'll come back to that in more detail in a second. We don't feel ready. Our setup wasn't great. Our balance wasn't great. We're not happy with it as we were in Barcelona. The engine controversy. We developed our engine for a long time. That's why we are surprised that things could change so quickly. Our rivals think we have an advantage, but we know that we don't. However, lobbying in F1 has always been like this. So, look, Toto knows that there are games being played out there to try and limit Mercedes' potential. But he also knows he can play the games too. And that is maybe what is going on at the moment. But again, we don't really know. Now, there was some speculation the other day that if they were to change the rules, because if there's agreement from 4 of the 5 manufacturers to change the way that regulation is written in terms of how it is measured, Toto's been quite clear that, like, that would affect them, right? He's not denying that it would do anything. He does say that, yeah, if they change the rules, then we will have to compromise. Now, I thought what Mercedes would say is, well, if they change the rules, it'll take us however long to fix the engine. There's no way we can do it for the start of the season. That's not really what Toto's saying here. He says, look, if they change the rules, which would require both the FIA and Liberty Media to agree to this, which was the point the other day, we're not going to sue anyone. We trust that Domenicali and the FIA will look at the situation carefully. Someone wants an F1 with BOP, balance of performance. Big drama talking point in WEC, the World Endurance Championship, without calling it BOP. So effectively he's saying, look, they want to nerf us just because we're better, and that isn't, that shouldn't be how things are in Formula 1. I'd be inclined to agree, but I do think it depends to an extent on how Mercedes are achieving this advantage. But again, it wasn't long ago that this was just a theory, and now Toto Wolff is being very clear. If the governing body votes for a change in regulations, we have to accept it. It would be detrimental to all Mercedes-powered teams. The gain for us is only a few horsepower. What is a few, right? Because the rumour was it could be 13, could be 20, maybe it's 5 or 6, but whatever, that could be a tenth a lap or a tenth and a half a lap or something. we always expect the sports, or we always respect the sports governance. If the governing body makes a decision against or in favour of our position, we must comply with both. There was then Nicolas Tombazis spotted, apparently having a lengthy meeting with Mercedes. Here he is walking out with George Russell of the Bahrain paddock. So, look, Toto Wolff even came out of this meeting and he was asked what was going on in there, and he said, all we talked about was the engine for the last several hours. Now, this is all very well aligned with this comment from Toto Wolff. To be honest, I was hoping that Red Bull would be worse than they are. It looks like they have done a very good job. Right now, the car and power unit are the benchmark. And of course, they've got Max in the car as well. They are able to deploy far more energy on the straights than everyone else over consecutive laps. And based on the data today, that looks actually pretty bang on the money, right? Like, Red Bull were able to keep those high top speeds lap after lap very consistently, and the Mercedes-powered cars weren't able to achieve quite the same thing. Now, let's not forget, it wasn't long ago, Christian Horner said it would be embarrassing if Mercedes were to be somehow behind Red Bull powertrains in their first year creating their own engine. By all accounts, Red Bull powertrains seemingly have done an excellent job with their power unit. There was talk for the last few years that they had better energy deployment than rivals, but that was mainly put down to Honda and their massive development on the electrical side that they put in after the engine freeze and all that type of stuff happened, or before that came into place. You guys know the drill in that power unit era when Red Bull were not competitive early doors. So Honda made some changes, they put in a lot of money, but it seems like they still have that level of, maybe not advantage, because I don't know where that sits compared to others, but Red Bull will certainly be very pleased. They ran very well today. Max put in a ton of laps consistently in pretty warm, difficult conditions. The consistency was strong across the sessions that Max run today. And also, the electrical deployment seems better and more consistent than anybody else. But again, the key question that has come out of this is Toto also just playing the game? Yes, today, Max and Red Bull looked like the best combination. The McLaren, the Ferrari, the Mercedes, not looking on the same planet today as Max. It's only testing. But when Toto says Red Bull is a second faster per lap because of this, which is also what he went on to say, people are wondering, is that just a ploy, right? Like, do we really believe that Red Bull are that far advanced of where Mercedes' power unit is? It's difficult to believe that Mercedes, given all of their strength and execution and everything, would be substantially behind where Red Bull are on power unit. It was considered that the best case scenario for Red Bull was that they would be the same. Certainly not that they would have some sort of advantage. So either Mercedes have messed up big time, or, what is probably more plausible, is that Mercedes are themselves playing a bit of a game here. They at least are to a certain degree. How much of an extent, I don't know. But look, Mercedes played this game back in 2014. They knew they had the best car by a mile. I'm not saying they know that this time. Toto is saying otherwise. He says Red Bull is the benchmark right now, which is quite the statement. Not a statement I expected to come out of today with. But Mercedes knew that if they showed their full hand in 2014, they would get things dealt with. The decision on the compression ratio has not yet been made. And I do wonder if there's a little bit of, if Mercedes came out today and had just an unbelievable performance, their engine looked unbelievable, like they were banging in lap times that nobody else could deal with. Obviously, it raises the level for the other teams and the FIA and Liberty Media to say, oh, well, it looks like Mercedes are going to win unless we take action right now. Liberty Media, the FOM, they could be a deciding vote in this. If they don't agree to change the compression ratio regulation, then it won't happen. And if Mercedes can say, oh, look, poor us, Red Bull are already better, and now you're trying to nerf our engine even further, it's like, Max is going to win again by a mile, he's the best driver and all this. So I think there's at least a bit of a game getting played here. And Mercedes are probably trying to an extent not to show what they are fully capable of. I'm not saying that prime Mercedes are back. Exactly, they have struggled for the last couple of years. But we know what prime Mercedes used to get up to in testing, right? And I'm sure that there's at least part of that going on because there's just so much politics right now behind the scenes that I wouldn't be surprised if some games are getting played at the very least. Anyway, these were the final standings pretty much. We had just an hour left or so of the session at this moment. We actually had some broadcasting. It looks like the telemetry and everything on the left-hand side and the, well, what do you call it? The graphics basically are the same as they were last year. These are your final numbers. Williams did the most laps of the day, 145. So they needed it, but they did a great job. Of course, the main drama was about Red Bull and Mercedes and all that, but Williams, definitely a great day for them. Right, tons of laps. And by consequence, not a bad day for Mercedes in the sense that they themselves only got 85 laps in. Not great, really. So that's not where they would like to be, I don't imagine. Not their best day, but they were working a lot on balance and setup, I think, because they were having some issues. But their power unit still got plenty of laps in, largely thanks to Williams. McLaren at 109, Cadillac at 104. So again, good day for Ferrari in terms of reliability running. Red Bull at 133 in Max's hands. Aston Martin, though, only 36. Rough start for them. Honda 36, Audi 122, Red Bull powertrains 211, Ferrari 354, and Mercedes power unit at 420. And the lap times were led by Lando Norris with a 134.6. Max was a 10th down on that, then Leclerc. But again, these don't really mean that much at this stage. But very much on Twitter your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.